Welcome to my shop here in the hills of Vermont, where we continue to be dedicated to making wood smaller. Today I'm going to talk about how to make a flower using a four-way inside-out turning process. This is what it will look like. And it's a fairly simple process. You're going to first need some stock, absolutely square. It's nice to have a little engineering square to make really sure, and it needs each side to be exactly the same length. It can be 1 by 1, 1 1/4, 1 1/2, I'd say up to 2 inches square. I use 1 1/4 to 1 1/2 most of the time. It all depends on how big you want your flower to be. The first step is to connect 4 of these. You can saw out a bar of this and lop it into 6-inch pieces. It is helpful to have each piece exactly the same length, but not absolutely necessary. But we're going to glue it together in a way that it can come apart again. I am using double stick tape because I don't want to wait for the glue, but you can glue a piece of paper in between each of these 4 pieces. Once it's set, we can do the turning and pop it apart. So in the gluing process, one thing you want to be absolutely certain of is that this little cross in the middle is really in the middle. All 4 lines come together, all 4 pieces align on both ends. So I'm going to go ahead and put this tape and connect these together. It is really tough tape. Okay, finally got the tape on. These need to be very careful putting these together. You want, if you got them the same length, the ends should align exactly, and the joints should be flush when you feel it, no step through. And then clamp it. If it's not flush, pull it apart. Get it right. Flush on the ends, flush on the faces. I'll leave them in a vise for like 5 minutes, and then check the faces that you're going to join. You're going to connect these two with the first two using the same tape and clamp it again. But in between, you should check that this is still flat, dead flat. And if it is, fine, but if it's not, you should level it with sandpaper or cabinet scraper or belt sander or something, because that should be dead flat. So I'll connect these two again. This is where it's important that this cross is dead center. None of these lines come in on the offset. This is a handy thing for a vise. You stick some wood in there so it's got a soft jaw instead of a hard jaw. And then I'll give that a few minutes to set. Alright, I'm ready to chuck this up. When you choose your stock size, make sure a square like this is going to fit in your chuck. If it doesn't, you'll have to put it between centers and turn a spigot that will fit your chuck. But when you do that, just be sure and use the intersection of these 4 lines as your center. In your tailstock, you do not want a cone center. It will pry your joint apart. Use a cup center and make sure that pin goes right in the middle of the cross. Dead center. You do that before you tighten your scroll chuck so you can adjust it. Use a cup center because it won't pry these joints apart. And get it centered, tighten up the chuck. Now we're only going to do a little turning here. So we're going to turn the profile of the inside of this flower, which means something like this. So you visualize the petal will come out of the center like this later on. So this will be inside. One warning, don't go beyond the center. Keep this angle, preserve that. 1/2 inch spindle gouge, probably 500 RPMs, 600. And I'm carefully gonna cut this end off. So the more you take off here, the deeper the throat or the center of your flower is going to be. You could even make a little step here, and that will leave a little platform at the bottom of that, inside of that flower. I'm going to come down a little bit more. Now, this is all it takes for the inside, and this will be your last chance to sand it. So get that done. Alright, we're all sanded down to about 320. This is a slip of the table saw for when I was sawing out these squares. And it's time to separate these 4 blocks. I'll show you how that's done with this double stick tape business. Clamp the bottom pair, and I'm staying away from this top part. Separate these guys with a chisel, and I find it isn't necessary to mark them and get them back in exactly the same positions when you reverse them. Not if you did a good job of keeping things symmetric. Take the tape off. So we're ready for the final gluing. Turn these guys 90 degrees, glue them together so it looks like this. 4 points pointing outwards. Got that? Don't get the wrong positions. And when you glue it, again, try to make sure these bottoms are flush. And everything is direct and perfect alignment This is where having them exactly the same length helps, because you know they're in alignment when you set it like this. So I'm going to glue these together. Again, you want a perfect square, a perfect cross on the bottom, no offset blocks. So I'm going to glue and clamp this and come back tomorrow. There is incidentally one step you can take while this glue is setting. I didn't do it on this, and you can see the problem. You see this face here, there, on every pedal. There's a face on the very tip. Well, we can prevent that at this stage. If you try to do it later, there's no support and you'll have a lot of trouble doing it. And the way to do it is to bevel each of these corners down about a quarter of an inch deep, and go down about 3/4 of an inch along this angle. A disc sander works. So we're sort of rounding the top of the pedal here. And you have 8 angles to round, and it's important to preserve this corner. So always work inwards and not off the corner. Just round it over the top and blend it. But go in towards that corner, it might peel off. And these are the tips of the pedals, will come out looking quite a lot better. And blend it across the top. You're only going down about 3/4 of an inch. And do that with all 4 pedals. So here's what the pedals will look like after you bevel them. The bevel only comes down maybe 1/8 of an inch here on each corner, and rounded over the top, blended in with the rounded surface you've already turned, and it wouldn't hurt to sand these file marks out if you used a file. I found a coarse file, double cut, worked pretty well. Good luck. Well, it's another day, and our little assembly here is ready to go back on the lathe for the last step. A couple of notes. These points are going to be the ends of the pedals, and they're exceedingly fragile, and they might break off. So it's a good idea to sweep the floor and turn off your dust sucker if you want to find the point that broke off and glue it back on. Another thing you can do is saturate these with thin CA glue, cyanoacrylate, it's super glue, and hit it with some accelerator, and it will give them more strength so they're less likely to break off. So let's home in on the lathe here, because there's a step that's pretty important. And that is the alignment. So for starters, I put the tool rest up right next to one of the points. So it's maybe 1/8 of an inch away. Turn the assembly, and for starters, don't reef up on this chuck. Leave it a little bit loose, because we want every tip to be exactly the same distance from the tool rest. This is symmetry that we try to preserve through the whole process. So bring the tool rest up really close, almost touching. Each tip should go past it at about the same distance. Is that obvious here? Right here is where you're just almost grazing the tool rest. That is a little too far out. That's going to hit. There. That's within a 30-second. Crank the chuck up seriously tight. Make sure it didn't move. Get ready to go. Now, I'll use 3/4 inch spindle gouge. I'm going to take the corners off, and you can go down to the glue joint without having to worry. So by the time it's round, you can keep going. It'll get round right about when you hit the glue joint. And I'm going to make it so it's downhill when I cut these corners up near the pedals. And those are what are really going to take the skill to do, because we want them 1/8 of an inch or less. Let's see if we can get this going. I'm running about 900 RPMs. I'm using this 1/2 inch spindle gouge very much on edge, so the wood is being cut by the leading edge and going downhill, and it's a shearing cut. It's not facing straight into the wood. It's at a steep angle. And I'm creeping up closer and closer to this corner. Once I get there, I won't touch it. I'll continue thinning it farther down the pedal. So I've just resharpened on a grindstone. But one thing I do when I want it really sharp is I use this little diamond rod to take the burr off the inside of the flute. Because I take a super fine shaving as I'm approaching this pedal final thickness. I'm only cutting with the left hand side, so I don't even need the other half. Here we go. When you're cut, remember we beveled the top edges of this? Each pedal, when your cut starts to reach that bevel, you should probably call it quits and move on down the side. And I am just about there. As you get deeper down, the pedals will start to open up. You'll get a groove in between them. And they'll be very thin on the edges and thick in the middle, which is quite convenient because it gives it support, but it makes it look delicate. And you can go in as far as you want. The farther in you go, the more separation between each pedal you'll get. So we're seeing good symmetry here, but a poor glue joint. That's open there, and it's open here, but it's glued here. This glue joint gives your pedals support at an area where the cross-section is minimal. It's getting really low here, and they start to get flexible. So leave a little glue joint between those guys. This wood is holding together well on the tips. I was a little worried. I'm going to start working on a base here. I'm not going to take these down anymore because they're starting to get flexible. Sanding's the next step. I'll come back when that's done and we'll part it off, maybe put some finish on it. Okay, I've sanded down to about 400. Now, mostly hand sanding on the pedals, power sanding on the base. If you don't have even thickness on each pedal, it means your symmetry was not totally in control. This is pretty good, but there's a crack here where the glue joint was not flat. I'm gonna hit this with some spray lacquer, maybe several coats, and then take it off the lathe and bandsaw the base off and show you what the end product looks like. So we're all lacquered up and sanded. The last step is to bandsaw this base off. So remove it from the chuck. So I will take the base to a belt sander and finish that off. The obvious question is, what the heck do you do with these things? Well, they can be purely ornamental. I've thought of a couple ideas here. One is on this 6-way one, you can put a test tube in it like this and use it for a bud vase. And one other option is to turn it upside down and use it for our candlestick. Just you drill a 7/8 inch hole and stick one of these inserts in, and that's can hold a candle. Otherwise, I haven't figured out what they're good for. But this is it, and thanks for watching.